Hello everyone, and welcome to this video. So, we're getting close to the end of the semester for me. I got a bunch of stuff to do, and usually, if you've been on this channel for a while, you know that means my upload schedule gets very sporadic. I mean, if you've been watching Homestuck the last couple of videos, I was like, I'm recording this at 3 a.m. Yeah, my schedule is pretty crazy. But today I don't unfortunately have the luxury of recording at 3 a.m. because I have to get up early tomorrow. So instead I'm going to do the patented guilty flag on lazy tier list content. But I thought I'd do something at least interesting, not just, you know, random tier lists. I've done that before. And I wanted to rank Deltarune theories, because I was like, I wonder if there's a tier list on Tier Maker for that. Indeed there is, and here it is. So yeah, I'm going to rank the theories, and I'm just going to talk about them, so you get my opinion on this stuff, I guess. This is sort of a tide over, because my next, I'm doing a lot of writing, I'm doing a lot of essays and exams and stuff, so I haven't been very motivated to write a script, or at least like a summary, some notes about the next Deltarune theory video, so it might be a little bit. So here's the tide you over. Chris does not equal the player. I'm assuming this means like the player controls Chris. I don't think there's another one that talks about that situation. Yeah, I don't see anything. Which I feel like this is fairly likely. I've kind of gone back on it a little bit, and it's partially because of a different theory that is actually part of this list, so we'll talk about it in a second. Originally, when Chapter 2 came out, there was a whirlwind of stuff there, right? Because Chris looks like they're the knight. We might as well talk about that while it's here. Where is that gone over here? Maybe that's a little rough, but that's how I feel about it. Initially, when you play through the chapter, Chris makes a dark fountain. You're like, oh, they're the knight. And then you think about it a little bit more, and it's like, well, do they really have like the opportunity to be the knight? I'm a big proponent that Noelle and Birdley. I've used this when I was debating somebody in the comments before, and you know, if I ever debate you in the comments, it's all in good faith, because again, we would know basically nothing. But I do not think that Noelle and Birdley would be quite so willing to walk into a dark fountain like we saw with Chris and Susie in Chapter 1. Because if Susie wasn't there, Chris was clearly backing away, right? They did not want to go in there. But Susie kind of like peer pressured them to do so. In the scenario where it's Birdley and Noelle, I suppose Birdley could have peer pressured Noelle to do it. But I think he would have said something about it, right? Because they both believe it's a dream still, which is very easy to believe if they were in the library and then it got really dark and then they woke up at the end of it. Anyway, that was more about Chris as the knight. As in, the reason why I don't necessarily agree with Chris and the player, well, the Chris and the player are literally separate, but the control theory is more what I'm talking about, where Chris is controlled by the player. The reason why I'm questioning that somewhat recently is because of this theory. Gotta bring them all together. Third entity theory. There's obviously some sort of control happening, because Chris relates to Spamton's speech about puppet strings and stuff. Spamton calls Chris a heart on a chain. So clearly there is some sort of control happening. But whether the control comes from us, if we're like canon to the world, or if it's from something else is the question. I feel like both of these are kind of on the same level right now. Third entity might be a little bit higher, but I'm not sure. So the reason that third entity theory exists, and just a quick summary of it, is essentially there are 3 save files. And in Undertale, the save file was connected to the soul, right? When you save, you are saving with your soul and your determination. So having 3 save files is weird if we have 1 soul, but that could be, you know, just a gameplay convenience, right? Because it's way more convenient to have 3 save files than 1, especially in a game with multiple routes, which, you know, if Undertale did have 3 save files, that would make it more accessible, but it kind of goes against the point of the game, so I don't really mind. The other problem is a lot to do with the same cutscene that gave us Chris as the Knight, where Chris makes a dark fountain, because they make the dark fountain regardless of whether you've done Snowgrave or a regular route. And it kind of makes sense on a regular route for Chris to do this, because, you know, there's a whole bunch of rationalizations. Like, maybe Chris just wants Undyne to understand there's a real danger to dark fountains. Or maybe Chris wants to spend more time with Susie. Or maybe Chris wants to use the dark fountain to try to reconnect with Toriel, because, you know, that's kind of what happens in the other dark fountains with people. I mean, in Chapter 2, they reconnect with Noelle, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the route you take. So it's plausible they could think that. But the problem... the problem arises because, for me personally, even after all that, the problem is still there because Ralsei says, specifically, it only takes 3 dark fountains to cause the roaring. And that means that every time there is 2 dark fountains in the world, because Ralsei's dark fountain is always open. So by opening this one dark fountain, Chris is making it so that if the knight opens a fountain before they close this one, the world is going to end. So clearly, I don't think that's something Chris would do, even if they really wanted to hang out with Susie. Or like warn Undyne or something, because they're literally putting the world at stake. Which I guess they kind of always are when they go for these adventures, but that's not really their choice, which this is. So the theory would go that there is us controlling Chris when the game is on, and then Chris is actually basically never in control. Chris is only in control, and even then, I guess it's arguable that they could be not in control in these moments. But Chris is only in control when there is no control over the character. Like, we don't control them, and they are, like, not moving. So, like, when they're asleep, perhaps, or when, like, the thing where Chris jumps out to protect, I think it's Susie, or it might be Ralsei. It's one of the two of them, from Chaos King's attack, right, with the shield. Because that's, like, automatic. Like, it could be that this hypothetical third entity is controlling them at that point. But it could also be that that was just their actual intent. As well as like their facial expression and stuff like that seems to be controlled by them. However, the moments when we're not in control and Chris is still moving, in other words, during these cutscenes, like when Chris creates the Dark Fountain and the fake out in Chapter 1 with the pie and the knife, and who knows what other times in the past, they are actually being controlled by someone or something else, whether that be like Gaster or Asriel's soul or whatever. And I feel like it's fairly plausible. But then I think, well, why are we even in the equation then? You know? Because Chris's arc is a lot simpler if there is a third entity. If there actually is only 2 entities, and it's just Chris and this other entity, right? Why include the player in that? Like, there's some meta potential there, which I know Undertale is known for the meta sort of commentary using RPG mechanics. But I just think the whole arc of control is a lot simpler if we're going to have 3 entities, if the player is not one of those entities, you know? If we are going to have the player in, then I don't see the reason to have another entity controlling Chris when we're not there. I think those actions would then have to be Chris's. We just don't know the rationale behind it yet. So I guess third entity theory is kind of my, like, I feel like there's only 2 entities, but the reason I put it up here is because another entity that we don't think about is fairly plausible, I think. My personal theory on that, you're going to have to wait for it, because it's actually a bombshell theory that would have knocked it out of the park with the YouTube algorithm after the sweepstakes, but oh well, I didn't get to it in time, so I'm just, you know, chilling out. But yeah, I think it's fairly plausible, but I wouldn't say it's like the strongest theory, so that's why I have it there. Papyrus is the Eggman. Okay, both of these I'm putting in D. For one, because it probably doesn't matter. Like, I know the Eggman theme has, like, some similarities to the Gaster theme. But, like, they're Easter eggs. I'm not sure if it's actually going to matter. I would say Papyrus as the Eggman is worse than Gaster as the Eggman, because at least Gaster has some precedence for showing up in weird places, whereas Papyrus somehow entering the dark world to give us eggs, I just don't see happening. No matter how many, like, conveniences sort of come together to make it kind of maybe possible. Yeah, that's my thought on that. While we're on the Gaster train, let's grab this one. Is there another Gaster? I thought there was. Gaster is the knight. Okay. Let's just get Gaster out of the way. Personally, I do think Gaster is involved. I think Gaster is showing us this story from outside of it, though. I don't think Gaster is actually going to appear in the story. If he does appear in the story, it's going to be in a very meta sense, like we're going to fight him after we've completed the game as the vessel or something. I do not think he's going to have a direct hand in the game, because Toby's been very... there was the... I always bring this up. There was the tarot card of Gaster, right? And it's a beautiful image. I love it so much. But Toby made the creator of those tarot cards change it, which to me feels like Gaster isn't supposed to be seen. Like, Gaster is kind of like a concept more than he is a character. And for that reason, I'm not sure that Gaster is really going to have a like presence in the game. He's literally the man who talks with hands. He's like the invisible hand that guides you. Makes sense to me. So I do not think Gaster is going to be the knight. There's virtually no evidence for it, so I don't want to say it's like very flawed because there's no evidence, because there's like no evidence on either side really. It just like sounds cool. But this one we can talk about more. So I've brought this up on Reddit, I think. Yeah. But Gaster drove Spamton and Jevil insane. There actually is some evidence for this, okay? For one, they talk to a mysterious entity. Ooh, that sounds like Gaster. But more concretely, the person that Spamton was talking to on the phone, there was nothing but garbage noise. You know that line, probably, if you're up with your Deltarune theories. When he's talking to the phone, he leaves it off the line and runs out of the manor, and then the Addison comes in to check the phone, and he says there's nothing but garbage noise, which is the same message we get when we try to use our cell phone in the dark world. And that garbage noise, we know, is the Gaster sort of sound effect. I don't remember. It's ABC 123, I think. Is it? I think it is, right? It's just been so long. But ABC 123 used to be the "please don't spoil the game" message, and then it got changed. It's only related to Gaster because of fun value thing, I think. No. Whew, I almost made a huge mistake and got a billion comments. It's the song that plays when you're reading entry 17, which is in Wingdings and clearly connected to Gaster. It's the darker yet darker message. So it's clearly connected to Gaster. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure it was clearly connected to Gaster. I just don't remember how. But someone brought up an interesting idea, and I very much agree, that perhaps that sound that we hear, that garbage noise, is not like a sound that Gaster makes, but rather it's the sound of trying to connect to a different dimension or like a different plane of existence. Like that garbage noise is trying to reach something that doesn't exist, something that's been erased, or at least something that doesn't exist in your reality anymore. So when Gaster is trying to access his database to type entry 17, he's trying to send a signal to a place that doesn't exist, right? In his universe, wherever he is, scattered across the universe. And in the same way, when we are trying to call, like, Toriel, for example, Toriel does not exist in the dark world, and thus we get the same sound effect. Which would mean that Spamton was talking to a Lightner. Which makes a lot of sense, because we know that Lightners are supposed to give Darkners purpose, right? So when Spamton was in contact with a Lightner, Spamton had a lot more purpose in life. But this also means that Lightner left, right? Like, that Lightner was within the Dark World at some point and then left. And we don't really know how time works in the Dark World, so I'm not going to speculate who that might have been. But I think, to me, it makes a lot more sense for it to be a Lightner than for it to be Gaster, you know? And I do have a theory on who it could have been. And you know what? I guess I'll share it. Gerson. Gerson's a very weird character in Deltarune, because he's like the only character who's like dead in Deltarune but was alive in Undertale, other than the Amalgamates, who are basically undead. So it kind of makes sense they're not alive in this timeline. And so on the bench in the graveyard where you can find Gerson's grave, along with the other ones, there's a little plaque dedicated to Gerson, and it says something along the lines of, take a break, maybe like fall to sleep, and if anybody asks you what you're doing, tell them that you're writing. Which would, to me, insinuate that, or it was something about dreams and writing, would insinuate that Gerson may have entered a dark world at some point, whether he was aware of it or not. Let me bring up the full quote. Let me just pause the video and bring up the full quote, because this is kind of important. Okay, here it is from Tumblr. Gerson Boom Memorial Bench. Throughout my career, some of my best ideas came from dreams. So, and then it goes on to say, so if anybody asks what you're doing here, tell them that you're writing. And so, yeah, because the dark world has been equated to dreams so many times, I think that's very interesting. And it could perhaps suggest that maybe Gerson has been in a dark world before. And if that is the case, the two places that we've talked to, or that have been dark fountains, would probably have some history with him, because they are the library, and he was an author, and his classroom in the school. So there's clearly something going on there. I'm not sure if I'm 100% right on the mark, but I think that would be my theory for what happened with Spamton and Jevil, personally. Something about Gerson, maybe not even really recognizing that he was talking to, like, people from another dimension. Maybe he just thought he was asleep, just like Noelle and Birdley did. And yeah, that's my thought. Anyway, I don't think it's like totally bogus, because if the whole Gaster noise connecting to another dimension thing doesn't pan out, then it's very likely to be Gaster. But the good news is we'll probably be able to test this in Chapter 3, because Toria will be in the Dark World with us. So if we call her cell phone and it works, then we'll know that, yes, that sound only happens when you're trying to connect between dimensions, which is very cool. Okay, I gotta go faster. How long have I been going? I can't even see it. 20 minutes. It's not terrible. Let's get the easy ones out of the way. Rousey is a girl? No. I mean, okay. My imagination, because I'm not familiar with this one, is that maybe this is someone saying, like, in the light world, Rousey is a girl, and Rousey is not really a darkener, which I don't really like that theory either, because so we can put Rousey as Azrael down here too. I don't really like that theory that Rousey is a lightener, because the portrait doesn't match, and it'd be weird to have that be inconsistent, but also because clearly Rousey has magic, and we know that monsters can't use magic in the light world. Except maybe Caddy can, so maybe it's possible, but I just don't really think that Rousey is a lightener, and Rousey definitely isn't Flowey, or Azrael, probably not Azrael, for the same reasons why I think Chris can't be the knight in a lot of cases, because people would notice they were doing something weird, you know? If, like, Chris went to the library in the middle of the night, or like went to school very early, that'd be weird for them, right? So yeah, if Rousey showed up in town, people would be like, oh, Rousey, you're back, and we'd hear about it. Definitely, because the whole town knows how close Chris and Rousey are. Like, they talk about Chris and Azrael. Now I'm confusing them. Oh no. Literally every time Chris talks to them, they talk about Azrael. So, like, I really don't think if Azrael was walking around, even in disguise, okay? Like, Azrael is not not known to be a very stealthy character, let's say, or a very cunning character. Azrael's very, what would you say? Straightforward, let's say. I just don't see it possible. I do kind of like it on the train of thought that the Dark Worlds are all just a ploy for Azrael to try to help Chris sort of, you know, have a social life. I do kind of like that idea. That's kind of nice. But, yeah, I don't know if I believe that Azrael could just hang around town and nobody would know. and cast some dark magic that they learned somehow. Okay. Horn headband. I guess we'll go for it. I don't mind it. I think it makes some good sense that Rousey could be the horn headband, which is why they have so many traits that we would relate with the Dreamer family, because they were related to Chris's desire to fit in with the Dreamers, to have horns and be a goat person. And maybe it relates to a more childlike version of Chris, the kind of Chris that they left behind when they got possessed or something, who's very sweet and I guess confused about themselves, you know? Because Rousey is confused about himself. He's like, I don't know what it's like to be Rousey-like, which it does kind of parallel to the feelings Chris must have had when they were like, how do I fit in with this family of monsters as a regular human? But at the same time, there's a couple reasons why I think Rousey probably isn't related to Chris in a very substantial way. One is kind of a cop-out, but it's something I gotta bring up, and it's pronouns, okay? Chris is they, never referred to with any specific pronoun, right? And you could very easily do the same thing for Rousey. I mean, Rousey's like a shadow creature in Chapter 1. We don't even see Rousey's true face till the very end. So you could have very easily, if Rousey was going to be connected to Chris in this way, also just make them they. But no, Rousey is he, like we've talked about. And maybe it's because of the whole Prince of the Dark thing. But I really think you could have managed to get around that if Toby wanted to. I think he could have. So that's one thing. And the other thing being that Rousey is not a prankster. And that's the one thing we know about Chris as a kid. Chris was a notorious prankster. I would think Rousey would be a bit more trickstery if they had anything to do with Chris, right? So that's my thought on that. Sans originated from Deltarune. I don't mind this one. I mean, this is another one of those ones with like no real supporting evidence, but that means there's like nothing to contradict it with either. The only thing we have is, and this is significant, is Sans has that thing in his workshop that's locked that says "Don't Forget" on it, which is the name of the credits theme for Deltarune, which seems very important. It's also like the main theme of Deltarune, but specifically the credits theme is called "Don't Forget." And along with that, we don't know, we have that machine in there and we don't know what it does. And Sans is aware of alternate dimensions in Undertale, or at least alternate timelines, which Deltarune might be. So I think it's possible. I don't know if we'll actually get it confirmed, though. I feel like this is another one of those things where we're never meant to really know, like kind of like Gaster. We're never meant to really know, because if we know, then it's not fun anymore. You know what I mean? If we knew exactly what the deal with Sans was, he would not be like one of the most popular characters in like video game spaces. It's because he's mysterious and cool that he ends up there. The vessel is the night. I've actually not heard anybody argue this, other than just saying, well, it could be. I'm going to put this in here, I think. Because, on one hand, I kind of agree, like, this is possible. Especially if the vessel is, like, if we're going to use it at some point. It is saved in the game, so it's going to be used for something. What that is, we don't know. But at the same time, I feel like... I might have to put it in here. I feel like if there was like a shambling corpse thing walking around the town, people would notice as well. Even if it was by the cover of Nightfall. Like, I don't know. I just don't buy it. That like nobody in the entire town has seen this like mysterious figure going around. Which is also why I think I saw Kara as the Night somewhere. Yeah. I also don't really buy this. Actually, I'll put this in D because we don't even know Kara's in this universe or not. For all we know, Chris is Kara in this universe. I just feel like if the knight was someone who had to sneak around to do their dirty business, that somebody would see them. I feel like it makes a lot more sense if the knight is someone who nobody would suspect if they walked into a place, which is why my top list of candidates is like Mayor Holiday and Father Alvin and who's the other one? Oh, Noel. These are characters who, if they went to the school, specifically Alvin going to the to his father's classroom, right? And the mayor going to visit Noel, presumably, or just check up on the school's functioning. If they went to these places, Noel's known for being at the library. Again, the library is connected to Gerson, and then the mayor could just be doing a business call, quote unquote. If they went to these places, nobody would bat an eye. And I feel like that's fairly important if you're going to be a knight candidate, because these are very open places to the public. Like, literally, the library is like right next to a huge traffic jam at the time. If anybody had gone in there that wasn't supposed to be there, I feel like people would have saw it. And again, I'm a proponent of the fact that the library fountain was created very quickly after Noel and Birdley entered the library. Because there's a line about the closet, and like they didn't see the dark fountain, so like, you know, yeah, I explained that earlier. So I really think right now that's probably the strongest determination I'm using to be like, this person could be the knight, is that they have to be kind of related to these places, so they kind of fit in with them. And now I just saw this. I didn't even see this was here. But Noel is the knight. I like it a lot. There's a lot of reasons. One, Noel is set up as this like innocent character at the very beginning. And we see that Noel is capable of great power. And Noel has a good motive as well. Like, okay, Noel isn't suspicious for being at the library or being in the school. Although the closet thing is kind of a contradiction, so that's why it's down a tier from the other ones. The closet thing, I feel like that's implying somebody was in there. And Noel has a good motive because magic can save her dad, and her sister went missing, so maybe she's thinking she might have ended up in a dark fountain. She could have learned about the dark fountains from Caddy and her dark magic, quote unquote. And I feel like Noel hides a lot, right? Noel isn't a character like Azriel, for example, that is very straightforward. Noel hides a lot. That's a huge part of her character. She hides all her troubles and all of this. She's the kind of person to have a secret vent blog that she doesn't let anybody look at, other than, I think, like one person, like Caddy maybe. And she always comes off as being like super nice, right? Like she tries so hard to come off as super nice. So I feel like she, of all characters, is a character who could hide being the knight. And maybe there's some other things too. In chapter 1, Noel volunteers to go with Susie to the Dark Fountain. So perhaps, along with her motives that we already talked about, perhaps she was going to use the Dark Fountain to get closer to Susie. And then, you know what? Chris went instead because of Alphys's insistence, and Noel kind of had to bend to that if she's going to keep up her sort of front as, you know, what everybody thinks of her as, right? And so she kind of had to bend to that, and then Chris and Susie become great friends, and Noel must have been so jealous. And so in chapter 2, she plants the seed in their head to come to the library. And then they do, and there's a dark fountain there. Whoa! I think it's possible that she could have stabbed the floor without Birdley noticing. Especially if you can stab it with anything that resembles a blade. Like, Birdley was going to stab it with the halberd, right? Chris uses a knife. But she could have assumedly used her pencil to do it even. Which is interesting, because in chapter 1 we established she always has spare pencils. Because that's a sharp object, like, you know. And she has a ton of determination, clearly, because Queen thought she could be a good knight replacement. She's never met King, so we don't have that contradiction of the knight meeting King, or like the knight fighting, or King fighting the knight and not being like, why have you betrayed me? And it kind of, a lot of people have brought this up before, that like, why is the king working with the knight if the king hates Lightners? Surely, in some theorists' idea, that must mean that the knight isn't a Lightner, or they are something other than a Lightner or Darkner. That's possible. But it could also be that King sympathized with the knight because the knight is also someone who is downtrodden and outcast. And Noelle kind of fits that bill. You know? With a hidden darkness and everything. And this isn't to say that I think Noelle is like secretly evil, or like, I guess she's kind of manipulating people, but I think it's more in like the cartoon sort of way where like, oh, I have to lie to people so that they'll like me, sort of thing, right? Nobody would like me for who I really am, which is depressed. And if Noelle were to be the knight, I do not think she would be like the final boss. In fact, I don't think the knight, whoever they are, is going to be the final boss, because we have all these like giant gods set up that I feel like are far more likely to be so. But yeah, I could see Noelle being the knight. I think it's kind of hard because Noelle's the character we have the most information on right now, because of the sweepstakes and Snowgrave and all that. So it's very easy to say like Noelle is everything. Like, for example, Noelle is the angel, because we have all this information about her. It's so easy. But at the same time, you kind of have to temper yourself and be like, okay, well, it could make sense, but she could also just be a side character that never shows up again for all we know. We're kind of biased at a Chapter 2 standpoint towards thinking Noelle is very important. The reason I put Noelle as the angel pretty low, specifically, is because I don't think she's literally the angel. Even if she's going to, like, become the angel, I do not think she is already the angel, you know what I mean? Although it would be kind of within her character arc for her to, the same thing I was talking about with the knight, for her to be trying to, you know, gain power to heal her dad or something from the angel, and then breaking the angel's heaven is like breaking Noelle's happy little pretend world. I don't know. I think even if Noelle fills the role of the angel in the story, Noelle is not already the angel. Noelle is going to be like a body for the angel to inhabit in that sort of a case. So I put it a little bit lower for that reason. This is another theory with like no evidence other than like Noelle made like a little angel figure with Des, and Spamton calls her Angel. And I mean, I know some of the evidence I use for my own theories and some of the evidence for these theories is similarly silly, but at the same time, this is like a huge part of the lore. This isn't like, I would say this is an even bigger part of the lore than the knight, right? Like the knight is really just one character, who might not even end up mattering in the end, whereas the angel feels like they are an overarching force that's going to influence the entire story. So yeah, I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it. Susie used to live in a human settlement. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really change a whole lot. It kind of makes sense why she and Chris get along so easily, because like they're kind of in the same scenario. Chris is a human in a monster settlement, and Susie was a monster in a human settlement. We know Susie's moved recently, and there's that line that people bring up where Susie says, "Everybody bleeds, right?" Despite the fact that monsters do not bleed, which could mean like, you know, as a colloquialism she picked up from humans. And yeah, I mean, sure. I don't think there's literally any evidence you could use to say she's not potentially from a human settlement. Like she moved from a human city. But there's the evidence for is kind of weak, and it doesn't really matter in the end, so I don't really mind. It's like, so that's why I'm putting it here. I think it's equally likely she could just come from a not so great home, you know? Or both, which might be the truth of it. Chris's Kara, honestly, I feel like I have to put this here. Specifically for, like, Chris is the Deltarune version of Kara. Not that they're even the same person, necessarily, but, like, the only other way you can explain the stuff, like the proclivity for knives, the relationship with Azrael, the demon horn headband, the love of chocolate, the same damn shirt. The only way you could explain that is to say, like, oh, the Dreamers raise, like, all of their kids in every timeline the exact same. So they always end up liking chocolate, they always have a proclivity for knives, and they always wear the same shirt. And have a demon horn headband. And it's, like, possible, because there are a lot of conveniences in the Deltarune world. Like, Undyne is the exact same, except instead of a guard, she's a cop. Like, you know? So it's possible that Chris could be a separate entity from Kara, and Kara exists in the world, or have never existed. But I think it's like 98% likely that Chris is just the Kara of Deltarune. And I kind of like it more that way, you know? Like, if Kara came in at the end of the game and was like, I was raised by the Dreamers and it was horrible, I'd be like, okay. I feel like it's much stronger if we interrogate the flaws in the Dreamer parenting style, if it's with Chris instead, you know? That's just the way I think about it. Alright, Universal Mother. I actually referenced this in one of my videos. Universal Mother theory is basically that Queen is a representation of not just Noelle's over-controlling mother, but all of their mothers and the way she interacts with them. She doesn't pay attention to Birdly. She never interacts with Ralsei, because I guess Ralsei doesn't have a mom. Kind of makes sense, given he's a Darkner. Kind of puts words in Chris's mouth in the same way Toriel might, like, assume things about Chris without actually asking. And then, obviously, the over-controlling thing for Noelle. I'm trying to remember what the ideal was for Susie. I actually don't know. Maybe that, like, the Queen doesn't take an interest in her so much? Or, like, the Queen isn't, like when Queen talks to Susie, like, the one line I'm thinking of specifically is in the final battle, where she's like, Susie, join my side, and I'll give you as many skateboards as you want. So maybe there's that aspect of, like, you know, just do what I want sort of thing. Honestly, I don't mind it. Specifically the video I have a couple issues with. For one, I don't think Toriel's an alcoholic. Like, I know she drinks alcohol, and maybe that's her coping mechanism, which isn't great. But I do not think she's, like, an alcoholic that's, like, debilitating her or anything. And really, like I was saying, other than Chris and Noelle, and even then the Chris argument's a little bit, like, watery. Other than specifically Noelle, which we know has some sort of, like, Queen was influenced by her over-controlling mother. The other stuff is kind of like, well, this could be true. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, you're not wrong. It could be true. We don't know anything about Birdly's parents. We literally never heard a thing about them. And really, we know nothing about Susie's parents either. And I feel like Susie's parents would be more neglectful than Queen is to Susie, because Queen seems kind of, like, at least nice to Susie, which she doesn't even want to talk to her parents on the phone to say, I'm staying over at a friend's house. I feel like the relationship is not that simple between them, you know? There's definitely some more complications there. I don't think the relationship with Susie and her mother is like, I'm going to give you some skateboards, just do what I want, you know? So I like some parts of it, I don't like all of the parts of it, so that's it. T theory. I feel like this is basically confirmed, right? that the amount of health points you get from the specific character teas in Chapter 2 is showing how much the characters like each other. Because Noelle gets like 5,000 points or something from drinking Susie tea, because she's like obsessed with her. And then Chris gets like very little from Rousey tea, which is interesting. Rousey gets pretty equal amounts from Susie and like everybody. It's very interesting. You should look up a video on it if you've never seen it before. I'm trying to think of whose video I watched. It was so long ago. I'm so sorry. Or I'd recommend it. But yeah, it's a good theory, and I think it's definitely intentional, and I think it's definitely supposed to give us some insight onto the way the characters are feeling about each other in Chapter 2. We got some real bangers here, huh? Let's go with this, because this is easy. I mean, yeah. That's the whole thing. Like, I brought up the Gerson quote earlier about dreams and then writing. Like, those are both forms of escapism. That's just true. Susie and Chris love the dark world. I wonder why. Maybe it's because their light world lives kind of suck. Yeah, it's true. I think this is probably relating to more so the fact that, like, the dark worlds are thematically about escapism. As in, like, the theme of the game is going to be that escapism is fun, but, like, you can't try to live in escapism, you know? Like, you have to take care of your light world life too. You can't just live in the dark world, to put it that way. Which I can kind of see that. So either way, whichever interpretation you want to take, I think that's pretty solid. Okay. Rousey's evil. I think Rousey's hiding things, don't get me wrong, but I don't think Rousey's evil. I don't think it's in the capacity of Rousey's character to be, like, evil. Then again, if I would have met Asriel before Flowey, I would have said the same thing. I don't know. I just feel like there's, like, very little evidence to support the idea that Rousey's malicious. I think Rousey's just trying to hide things from the player. Specifically, when Rousey's talking to Chris off screen. I feel like that's Rousey being like, okay, Chris, you have to... I'm sorry about you being controlled by the soul or whatever, but we have to keep up the act so that the soul will keep playing the game, because that's how we save the world from darkness. Something like that. Or even if Rousey isn't talking to us, they're talking to whoever actually is controlling Chris. And then, like, Rousey doesn't want them to see his room. He's probably just shy. I mean, we know he's shy. He literally didn't show his face until the end of the first chapter. We know this guy's shy. But there's definitely a lot of hints being planted that Rousey is more than he seems, which I do believe is true. I think there's something going on with him, but I don't think he's evil. So that's why I put it in the middle. It's like half right. Like, Rousey is hiding something. Yeah, I agree. Because he's evil. I don't know about that. Chris killed Asriel. I don't know where to put this. Okay. Personally, this is where I'd put it. Because this theory relies on two very important things. Number one, Chris killed Asriel right before they left for college. Right before he left to college. I should probably say it that way so it's not confusing. Chris killed Asriel right before he went to college, and nobody found out. And this entire time, this is the second thing the theory relies on, this entire time, Asriel's contacted no one but Chris, supposedly, but that's actually Chris lying because Asriel's dead. And nobody finds that weird. Toriel, known overprotective parent, has not had like a phone call with Asriel every couple weeks or something. I just, it doesn't seem like it's possible to me. It's interesting, but it just doesn't seem possible. And again, like, I don't know. Did no one else from hometown? I guess not, because like everybody else is here. But did no one else from hometown try to contact Azrael ever? Like, I know Burger Pants apparently. Well, no, we don't even know that. We don't even know that Burger Pants hasn't contacted Azrael, because there are cell phones in this universe, you know. Yeah, I just. It relies on, like, everyone in town just being like, oh, Azrael doesn't want to talk to us anymore, even though he was, like, everybody's favorite guy, and we're just gonna live with that, I guess. And nobody's like, man, your brother totally ditched us, dude. Like, you think at least Caddy and Braddy or, like, Burger Pants would have, like, a monologue about it. He'd be like, yeah, I was Azrael's best friend in high school, and he left me behind to work this endless day job of misery. You know? Anyway. Death's voice in the code. That's like a very middle of the road thing. Could go either way. I do like the idea of it, but like we have no real evidence other than the fact that she's missing but not dead, presumably because there's no gravestone, to really settle in on whether she's the voice in the code or not. We don't even know if the voice in the code is like a person or, you know, it could just be like a Gaster-esque figure. And then chess theory. I don't think this is going to be super controversial, but yeah, I'd saved it for last anyway. I think it's fair. Like, there's no real reason to call Queen unless you were going for some sort of chess motif, because the first one was King. And I do think that the idea that King has to wait on the top of the tower because a king can't move very far in chess, but Queen goes all over Cyber City because a queen can go anywhere on a chessboard is interesting. My question just comes like, okay, where do we go now? The pawns thing I like too. The idea that Chris is a pawn, controlled by the player, that Spampton and Jevil were pawns in whoever they talk to's scheme or whatever, potentially. I like that. I like the idea of a pawn having to, like, Spampton and Jevil were pawns that, like, ascended to new power, you know? Because when you get a pawn to the opposite side of the chessboard, you can promote it into any other chess piece other than king. Interestingly, I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Maybe, I don't think you'd want two kings, so maybe just nobody ever does it, but I'm pretty sure you can't have a second king. Although I don't know if you can have a second queen either. I think it has to be, because you wouldn't have another piece to represent it, but I don't know. Maybe you can just, whatever. Regardless, I like the idea of pawns promoting into, like, super bosses. And I like the idea of the king and queen's movement schemes being related to their chess piece. I just don't really know how it works going forward. Obviously, we have a knight, and chess also has a knight. But how do you represent, a knight can move in an L shape? Or, like, I don't know, a knight can jump over pawns. Is that, like, going to be the thing with it? Like, is that going to be the reference? As in, like, the knight is always slipping past us and we're pawns, so that's, like, the reference. And how are we going to do a bishop can only move in diagonals? I don't know. But Mike is going to be the litmus test for this. Because it's possible Queen was just called Queen because King is king and they have some sort of relationship, right? So, like, Queen just got used to calling herself Queen because she was in a relationship with a king. Mike, or whoever the main boss of Chapter 3 is, will be the test of this. Because this is the first one that is completely separate from that court, the king's court, and should have no communication with them whatsoever. Like, it's possible that the laptop was brought to Gerson's classroom at some point for like a project or something, right? There should be no way that the TV or well, if Mike is the TV, there should be no way they've ever interacted. So if the TV still has some sort of rook or bishop, I guess the next piece is rook for sure. If it still has some sort of rookism to it that makes sense, then yeah, I can kind of get that. I'm all on board at that point. But if not, then you know, it was a good idea. The thing I will say about Mike TV, or whoever the TV is, Tenna, I forgot. Maybe it's Tenna. Being rook-like is they are on a TV stand. Like the TV's on a TV stand, and the rook is the castle piece, right? So perhaps because they're like a TV producer or something, they are at the top of this huge building, and maybe the whole building moves as they move, right? Like they move the building to do like Mettaton-esque game show things with us, and then move the building away. I could see that, you know, and that'd be very rook-like. The last thing I wanted to say. I think I might have forgotten it. Oh, no. This was very important. Oh, right. Castling. So castling is a move in chess, right? And it is a move that the rook performs with the king. Actually, can you castle the queen? Hold on, let me check. Okay, no, this is just a king thing, which makes it stronger. We know the king's in prison right now. Perhaps Tenna is going to castle with the king and, like, trade positions with the king, because that's what castling kind of is. That's pretty interesting, right? Maybe? Like, the king is going to break out of prison and we're going to put Tenna in there instead? Or Tenna is going to intentionally free the king, and then the king's just going to be like roaming free somehow in the in Ralsei's Dark Fountain, I guess, because like where else is he gonna go? But king still feels like he's on the side of the knight. So, you know. Oh, even more interesting on that. Perhaps the knight visits the Dark Fountain, Ralsei's Dark Fountain, while we're in the Mike or Tenna Dark World, and steals the king back. Because, like, who's going to stop him? Bloxer? I don't think so. Them, I should say. I always make the assumption that Alvin's the knight. We do not know that. That's just my own headcanon. And perhaps they free king while we're away. And then we come back and it's like, oh great, the prison cell's empty. Well, might as well throw Tenna in there, and that's castling. This is the thought to plant in your head at the end of this video. This took a lot longer than I was expecting, but it's fine because I don't have to edit it, so it's still going to save me time in the long run. That said, I do need to do things, so I'm going to quickly outro here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like. I hope my thoughts were interesting, and maybe you learned about a theory that you haven't heard before, and now you can go look it up. The only one I'm totally unfamiliar with is Ralsei's a girl. I've never heard that ever. So I might have to go look that up and see if I'm totally wrong about what it's supposed to mean. But yeah, that's like the end of the video. So leave a comment with your top 3 theories. I conveniently have 3 at the top here. And I think this is the order of them, too, that I would put them in. So leave me your top 3 theories from this list or beyond, and I will look at them in the comments. Okay, thank you for watching this long video. Okay, bye.